The Own Your Intuitive podcast is for the creatives, spiritual entrepreneurs, and light workers in the world. The shining ones who have been told to dim their light and stop believing in magic. I say screw that. The time to rise is now. To bring your gifts out into the world in a big way, creating a business that feeds your soul and your bank account. You are a magical being with the potential to change the world, one human at a time. The time for you to own your intuitive is now. Oh my goodness, magical beings of love light. I am so excited to have this special guest on today's Own Your Intuitive podcast. I met Jessie Johnson last February at an Unfair Advantage event. And literally it was spiritual love at first sight. It really was. I don't know how else to explain it. Like when our eyes would meet, it was like, yes, we just got each other, and like we didn't get that much time to jam out or to talk, but I feel like, you know, our souls have connected at a deeper level on many different planes and dimensions and lifespans. So I am so excited to make sweet spiritual love today. My guest and your new friend, Jessie Johnson. Welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for doing this and for having me. It's really fun to connect with you again.
I love it. I love it. Now, you've probably never listened to the podcast, which is totally cool, but I do start it this one particular way because it's my favorite question and it's so old school and it's so like lame-o in some way, but to me, it gives me like this like starting point of like knowing. And so, Jessie Johnson, would you begin today's podcast by telling everybody your origin story?
Oh, do you want the 30-second version or the 3-minute version or the 30-minute version? I know you want the 30-minute version, but like give me a little time frame because I'll do this differently depending on that.
Well, you know, I always say whatever comes out, it comes out. So it really, I don't want to time you. I just want you to be in free flow awesomeness.
Okay.
Tap in, tune in, and talk.
All right. So I was born to parents who were both psychologists. And they just really valued connection and emotional vulnerability and these things that are, you know, they definitely were kind of uncommon then. I think they're still pretty uncommon, although a little more popular these days. But I, like, right from the beginning, got that connection mattered. And I got that explicitly and implicitly, and I was an only child, so I got it heavily. And carried that. I would say that's like that piece of my origin story continues in my day-to-day. Meaning and depth and connection are really important to me. And they're important to every human being. Like I know that intellectually, but for me, I like don't have a toleration of anything less than real depth. And it shows up in some good ways and some challenging ways in all areas of my life. And then I went through life. I lived in a rural town in North Carolina in the mountains and was constantly just wanting more. I was good at school and very smart and tended to be pretty bored there. And the combination of all of this, it was like I was always hungry, always hungry for attention, for connection, for engagement, for challenge, for, I think in a way now when I look back on it, like for the channel of what I'm picturing, like some pipeline or something, like connecting to the energy of my core, like to kind of lock in so that I could just like flow. And to some extent, I found that when I went to art school. I went to Hampshire College and studied experimental filmmaking, and I was coming into my own and started going to New York City more often, and being an adult helped kind of open up some things. But the main thing that I ended up taking away from my time in college was that social justice was necessary. I had actually grown up in a segregated environment in North Carolina.
What does that mean for those listening who don't know what that means?
that like all the black kids hung out together and all the white kids hung out together. And I would even say that all the rich white kids pretty much hung out together and all the poor white kids hung out together. And like, there were just a lot of separation based on very superficial categorizations that no one talked about. And I, in particular, the one about race, like I didn't even recognize that that was an issue. So here we were in high school studying civil rights movement, reading about Martin Luther King, reading about racism and slavery and all kinds of things. Meanwhile, living in a segregated society, but no one talked about that. And I genuinely didn't know what was happening. When I went to college in New England, for whatever reason, New England was a little bit more like progressive in general, but also Hampshire College was very, very social justice oriented. And I got it. It was like, oh, okay, I was experiencing racism back then. I am racist. White people in general, racism is a real thing. That's not resolved. And I left with, it was a mixture, like anything, I suppose. But I left college with a clear determination to be of service. Like the kind of looking at the truth of how, at the time I would have said fucked our society was, really motivated me to choose a career that would give back, that would help. And at the time, I also, frankly, was like still kind of riddled with white guilt. Like I felt like I had so much privilege as a white, incredibly educated person that it would just be too much for me to make money, because then I would have that privilege on top of everything else. And it just felt like one of the best things I could do was to try to level the playing field by advocating for people who had less privilege and not taking more privilege than I already had. So I moved to New York City and I became a high school math teacher, which hit all those buttons for me, right? I felt like I was giving back. I was working with low-income youth. I was working on a very chunky problem, math education. Like if we had a live audience here and I asked them to raise their hand if they'd been traumatized in a math classroom, like 9 out of 10 people.
My hands up.
So it was like, I could be of service, I could work with people and experience deep connection, I could contribute in a positive way to the injustice in the world, and math teachers don't make that much money. So I could like play that role. And I actually really enjoyed, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. That was actually what got me into meditation. I would say I've always been spiritual, but I'd never like had a practice or anything of my own. But when I started teaching high school math, I was so overwhelmed by the emotional demand of working with these kids who were coming from such tremendous scarcity. There was not enough love, there was not enough privacy, there was not enough support, there was not enough money. Sometimes there weren't even enough desks in the school.
Can I ask how old you were when you were going through all that?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think 25, I started teaching.
Yeah.
I did a little in between, like I waitressed in New York and made experimental films and tried to be an artist. Because, starving artist works too.
Like experimental films leaves me with so many different thoughts going through my head, just so you know.
It's like, if you think like the Jackson Pollock wannabe, but on 16 millimeter film, that was me.
Very cool. Do you still have copies of any of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a little hard to project them now.
Oh, geez.
But yes. So, yeah, I think 25 was when I started. I went to graduate school at Columbia and learned some things about teaching math. And then I just got really passionate about the challenges that I saw there. And it was satisfying. It's like, it was so hard, but it was hitting on all those buttons for me, like the connection and service. Those are the buckets or the themes that I think of now. And so I stayed in math education for 12 years. And I was a classroom teacher for 7 of those years. And for 5 of those years, I was coaching math teachers and then math teams and then principals and then systems. So there's not really a hierarchy in education in the same way that there are in other fields, but to the extent that there was one, I kind of worked my way up it and learned so much about how people learn and how people change and how systems undermine that change. And that really is why I changed careers again, because at a certain point, what I saw was that I was not having a real impact. Like individually, like one kid's life might be better because we knew each other. But certainly we were in connection and there was a lot of really powerful benefit happening there. But I knew that I wanted to change the system. I wanted to move the needle. I wanted less than 9 out of 10 people raising their hand if I ask who's been traumatized in a math classroom. I wanted the way that people learn and the power of like individual thought to be at the center of classrooms. And it wasn't. And no matter how much money or resources, human or otherwise, were put into transforming schools, the system just systematically dismantled that change. Yeah. And it was shocking and amazing to watch. Now that I have a little more distance from it, it's kind of amazing actually that can happen. But it really was like a black hole. And I just wanted more. I wanted more integration. I wanted more freedom. I wanted more impact. I wanted more sense of agency. I wanted to feel more respected also.
So my question is, because I distracted you when you were talking about it, how that level of seriousness, if I'm using the right word here, of, impacting and making a difference and showing up and, implementing this social change in your school was the reason why you began meditation.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue too, because the whole time that in those last few years, especially, maybe the last 5 years when I was coaching, I was doing this very, very high level work in math education, working with some of the most brilliant minds and authors and researchers on the planet around math education, really high level conversations, dressing very professionally, wearing, New York version of heels, which is not real heels, but and then at the same time, I was producing these conscious events and traveling all over the country to go to festivals that involved a lot of kirtan, cacao ceremony, people, not necessarily ayahuasca, but people who were doing ayahuasca, just lots of spiritual technologies in this space. And then none of that over here. And similarly, all this high level conversation about global change and how to move the needle over here, none of that over here.
And I'm really glad that we will be putting the video version of this podcast up on YouTube on Friday as well, because you should see the hand gestures that are going on with Jesse Johnson right now.
Yes, I do.
I know, we've got over here, and everybody's like, I don't know where over here is, but I'm like, I can see what you're saying.
Yeah, so I'll just thank you. I will put that into words. So in the education space, there was a high degree of intellect and desire for impact and, excellence. There was a professionalism, a maturity. Those are better words. That was missing in the spiritual space. And in the spiritual space, there was genuinely a lot of openness and transformation and love that was missing in the educational space. And I was a leader in both, and I was a powerhouse in both, but no one from either of those parts of my life really understood the other part of me. They may not have even seen it or known it existed. So I was craving the integration of those two parts of myself. I had been teaching, so I started meditating when I started teaching. Then I started teaching meditation, and I was teaching my kids meditation. I was teaching my colleagues meditation. I was teaching also at yoga studios meditation, but none of that was fully integrated. It still felt like this kind of side thing that I was doing. On the outside, when the truth is that on my spiritual life is the most important thing to me. Always. So when I want to, in the origin story, both threads are there. I wanted more. I was still hungry. And so I decided, I didn't know what that would look like. I spent about a year trying to figure out, surely my tremendous experience and intellectual prowess and devotion would be worthwhile somewhere. Like someone had to be able to use those things, right? Like I'm so well educated. I have so many resources to bring to the table. Well, and it took a long time for me to realize that, I mean, I didn't see anything. That's a short version of that. I didn't see where it could take me. I didn't want to be a high school principal. I didn't want to work in the Board of Ed. I didn't want to just travel the world going to freaking hippie music festivals. I like those spaces, but that wasn't like the fulfillment or the culmination of everything. And then in 2015, in October, I saw that my old friend Marla Mattinson, who had been a math teacher, we had met at a super full-on geeky math teacher summer camp like 10 years before. And I saw her post something on Facebook about life coaching, and I'm sure that I had heard of life coaches before that, but I didn't take them seriously. I didn't think that I didn't understand what they were doing, and the only ones that I knew were very poor and just like experimenting with something. But Marla was excellent. Marla had all that educational excellence and maturity that I was really appreciating about the educational space. And here she was doing something that sounded pretty freaking out there, like spiritual, something else. It was something else. What is that? So I called her. What the hell are you doing? Like, what does that mean that you're a life coach now? I don't understand. And literally within 3 minutes, I was like, oh, this is it. I meant to be an entrepreneur. I meant to have my own business. That had never occurred to me. Didn't even register. So that was the biggest thing. And then of course, once that was on the table, it was like, oh, I can make this how I want. I can make this business include whatever parts of my life and my skill set that I want. And I just happen to want all of them to be in the pot. So I started that business. I mean, we sort of crafted that together. And then in January of 2016, I had my first paying coaching client. And the rest is history. I built a 7-figure business in 2 years. And the more that I do this work, now we're 3.5 years in now, coming up on 4. And what I see is that I'm more and more relevant and powerful in the mainstream space. And I'm more and more relevant and helpful in the spiritual space. Like I feel like my mission in this lifetime is actually about bringing those two, being one of the people. There's lots of people doing it. You're one of them. Being one of the people to bring those two things together, and specifically to use money and sales and business as a spiritual practice.
Okay, because that's what I was going to ask you, because you're like, I stepped into this world of life coaching and, serving and bringing these things together. But I'm like, what do you do, Jesse? Because now I'm super curious. Now I do know, but I'm super curious for my listeners, what that inspiration ended up being for you.
Well, it started as working with retreat leaders to help them have a bigger impact. Like I wanted to sort of bring that maturity and level of excellence from my educational background into spiritual education. Because I was seeing a lot of spiritual educators out there, spiritual teachers, people leading these retreats I just felt there was an opportunity for growth. It wasn't necessarily coming from something critical, just seeing like this is an area where their curriculum, their content can be even better. And what an amazing thing to be able to offer them the kind of support that I was offering math teachers so that they can improve the impact that they're having, the lastingness of the transformation that they're facilitating. And literally within 3 weeks, it was clear to me that was not going to work. Because the people that I was working with had a huge blind spot around money. And so it didn't matter if we talked about curriculum or impact if there weren't people in the room. And even for people that I was working with at that time they were filling their rooms, but they weren't making money, then they weren't going to be able to do it more than once or twice. They just use all their financial resources to get that one retreat off the ground and not be able to take it further. So that I did not expect. I did not expect for money to be, I didn't start a business to focus on money, but it had a certain sense to it, because I had been a math teacher all those years, and financial literacy was part of what I had and was teaching in that context anyway. And it excited me because I've always been a little radical, a little rebellious. And there was something about talking about money in a spiritual context that felt really like juicy to me.
Kind of taboo, kind of exciting.
Yeah. So I did that, and I've been doing that ever since. I help spiritual entrepreneurs build 7-figure businesses. And when I'm talking to other audience, I think you'll enjoy this. So I'll just share this with you because it's my new way of like introducing it. If I'm on a stage or if I meet someone on an airplane or something like that, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" Like, you know, those like yoga teachers, meditation teachers, they're always kind of broke. They like talk about law of attraction, but they never have any money. And everyone that I ask that to, they're like, "Oh, yeah, totally. I know who you're talking about." I'm like, I help those people build 7-figure businesses. And 9 out of 10 of the people that I speak to are like, "Wait, you can do that?" Like, that exists? It's like, yeah, man, you can do anything in this world. So just my existence, just the fact that my business exists is a radical, like mind-blowing thing for most people.
So like right off the bat, you did 3 weeks of doing the retreat leader thing and was like, "Nuh-uh, this ain't gonna fly. Don't feel good with this one." And then immediately switched to stepping into doing spiritual sales right from that platform.
I would say that I still was working with retreat leaders. I just was not focused on curriculum anymore.
Right.
And to be honest, if we went back 3 years and interviewed me, I was still hoping to focus on curriculum, but I just knew the money thing had to happen first.
Right.
And then as I worked on my own business and helped other people work on theirs, what I saw was like, oh, wow, this money thing is really, it's so tender. For me as a mathematician, I was thinking like money, like numbers, like we're just talking, this is very pragmatic. But the truth is that talking about money is, I think it's one of the most emotionally vulnerable things that there is. And so actually, there's no better place to talk about impact. There's no better place to talk about self-worth. There's no better place to talk about vision. There's no better place to talk about faith. There's no better place to talk about divine timing. Right? Like all these really...
Why did you say divine timing like that? Again, everybody needs to watch this video.
Oh, I love it. I said that because it's okay. I have so much to say about this topic. So it's like, especially with you, we could just geek out for hours and hours.
No, like I got really excited. I really hope everybody tunes into the YouTube to actually listen to this. It's worth watching it on the actual video.
The thing is that, okay, let's zoom out.
Done.
We all of us, human beings everywhere, whether they think they're spiritual or not, doesn't matter. Human beings are here to grow. We are here for more life. When you think about it like a tree is always going to be expanding. Its branches are going to be lengthening. There's going to be more leaves, new leaves, all that stuff forever until it dies, right? Then it'll stop. Human beings are the same way. The difference between human beings and trees is that we also have this counter directional energy, which I like to call our subconscious, which is designed to keep us safe. And from the perspective of the subconscious, growth looks like death.
Yes.
Because like thousands of years ago, it was. It's not anymore, but the subconscious isn't caught up. So fine. Okay. So here we take that principle into spiritual community, where explicitly the whole body of work, no matter what spiritual lineage, no matter what spiritual practice, it's all about growth. Deep, fast, like complete growth, complete healing, right? What do you think comes along with that intensity? A matching resistance. How does that show up? Superficiality, cliche, calling things perfect when they're not, right? Like using spiritual teachings to actually cover up the truth of what's going on. And so money as a tool for you just kind of can't talk about money in a spiritual context and not cut through whatever bullshit is trying to slow down the growth, right? Whatever resistance is coming up, whatever subconscious resistance is there. Talking about money like finds it. It's not comfortable, but it is very effective. And the reason that I said divine timing the way that I did is because divine timing is an example, in my experience, of how spiritual communities and spiritual people justify not growing. So they'll say, you know, I want to have a 7-figure business, or I want to have the love of my life in my life, or I want to heal this illness that I'm experiencing, or I want a closer connection with God. And if they then say, and it will happen in divine timing, that is their excuse for not claiming full authority and power in their life right now. So I call bullshit, like, not all the time. Divine timing is a real thing, okay? But I call bullshit on it more often than other things in spiritual circles, because it is so often used to cop out.
Oh, sister, you are, yes, so much yes. Because I don't know how many times, like, I'm like, people are like, I'm just waiting for God to tell me what to do. And I'm like, he doesn't tell you what to do, so to speak, right? Like, there's a level in which there's a guidance, but you're in momentum when the conversation is being had. You're in a business partnership. It's not like you get to stand in one space and God's going to just hand you things. You need to be working with God in order for there to be, you know, like I said, if I had a business partner and they didn't do anything, I'm not going to work with them anymore. Just saying.
That's such a good metaphor. I love it. Yeah, that's great. Ooh, that's so good. That's great. Yeah. And well, and I think that spiritual circles, community, I mean, I'm thinking about the teachings as well as the people when I talk about this. I don't think that it's all in there. Every single spiritual concept, teaching, principle can be used for growth or can be used for resistance. Just like everything, right? We can use everything to grow. We can use everything to slow down. It's not a criticism of the concept. No. It's just a calling to a higher standard for spiritual people to really be honest with themselves about what's happening and what's not happening, and where they're looking to find out a way of going into their victim in order to continue feeling safe.
Yes.
With compassion. There's nothing wrong with that. That's very human.
And so much of this, and I do love that it almost always comes back to money, which is what your work is so important for, because there's so much attachment to money when, you know, money is an energy, but yet we attach so many thoughts, feelings, emotions, worthiness, deserving, like all of these kinds of things. Like it actually, we give it energy that it doesn't actually have. And it creates a force within our life. Now you can say it however Jesse Johnson says it, but I would love for you to like kind of even share like how empowering it's been with your clients when they have these revelations about the money and how they can actually use it in service to the people that they're working with, and in the service to the greater good and human well-being and all the rest of it.
Well, and hearing you say that just reminded me that there's that kind of closure, I think, to the origin story, which is that after working for 12 years in this field of education that was designed to dismantle the cycle of poverty, and that I had chosen because I thought it would prevent my privilege from growing so disproportionately that I could somehow make up for the privilege that I had. What I saw is that it just fucking didn't work. Me sacrificing my capacity to grow, whether it was around money or anything else, did not then give my students something more. If anything, it did less, right? And Abraham Hicks talks about this so beautifully, like, you getting sick will not make another person well. That, I feel like that metaphor is like a little easier for my intellectual mind to grok than the money one, because with money, people often feel like, well, but if I don't have it, then somebody else can. No, it doesn't work that way any more than health does. So in fact, when I started doing this work around money, I changed my class. Like, I grew up middle class. I was, we had enough always, but we didn't live in luxury. And then when I started my business, that changed. I live we were talking about this when we got on the call. I manifested my dream house on the beach in Los Angeles. I live right in the center of town, and I have a full view of the beach, and there's nothing, it's like a private beach. There's nobody there. That's not middle class. I did that, then that's uncomfortable work. But the point is that now I know how to do that. I could actually teach that to my low-income kids from 10, 12, 20 years ago. I couldn't do that then. I didn't know how to teach them to be middle class because I didn't know how I became middle class. So that's just to kind of tie that up. Like, I have come to the conclusion that our personal sacrifice, we can choose that if we want, but it's not for anybody else. And having that contrast is what liberated me to actually creating a business that had money at the center of it, and finding a way to own that. So in terms of my clients, I regularly work with people who have been making $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, sometimes $10,000 or $20,000 a month, but more often like on the lower end of things. And within 6 weeks to 2 months, they add a zero to their monthly income. And it's easier than whatever they were doing before, which doesn't mean it's more comfortable. It's typically the most uncomfortable thing that they've ever done. But
isn't all expansion? We were just talking about the tree. The growth
exactly.
is not comfortable, friends, but it is necessary.
That's right. So, and the difference between the people who can do that and the people who can't is just a matter of urgency. You know, so if anyone that's listening to this, if you feel like you want to increase your income, if you want to have an extra zero on the end of whatever your monthly income is, if you feel like you want to have a 7-figure business or more, you can. You wouldn't have the dream, you wouldn't have the thought, you wouldn't have the idea if you didn't have the resources, the capacity to do that, because they come together. The idea is actually the evidence that the resources are there. And it's also, I think, really important to know that it's not just like all shits and giggles and like, let's just dream. This is not about dreaming. This is about acting and being in a very different way than most people ever, because in our country, and I would say in our world, class mobility is not common. In the States, it's said to be like the kind of American dream. It's like the heart of our culture, but it's still not common. Most people don't do it.
Can you explain that for everybody as well? Class mobilization?
Yeah, like changing so generally speaking, people live at the level of income that approximately matches the family that they were raised by.
Yes.
Occasionally, I mean, it varies a little bit, but like generally speaking, right? Donald Trump's kids are going to be billionaires for their whole life. Like that's just, right? But
that's what they learned.
Right. And most middle-class families raise middle-class kids. Most low-income families raise low-income kids. And there are occasional examples, okay? It's not that it never happens, but it's not the norm that someone breaks out of their class of origin in either direction. Mm-hmm. And there's a psychological reason for that, which we'll have to table for our next podcast. But
obviously, we're going to have you back because I know we have to cut this one a little short. And I'm like, we didn't even get started yet. Conversation.
You know what? We can just call this is like part 1 of 2.
I'm cool with that.
We'll pick up where we left off. Yeah,
so much more. We're not making the sweet spiritual love. We're getting the you know. The roots for the love are being planted today so that we can really go into the deeper practices and the deeper like psychology. I feel like there could be a conversation about psychedelics, and there's a conversation about and there's a conversation about so many other things we could be having on top of all this conversation as well.
I'm available. I love what you're doing. So yeah, what do you want to talk about in the next 5 minutes?
Well, there's the whole like tying up the podcast piece of that. Thing too. I do want to ask this because if I don't, I'll forget. And the first one's going out to my list this week. And one of the greatest things as a book nerd that I value and I find really important is learning. Like I'm hungry in the same sense as you're hungry, but I'm hungry for books as an author and as somebody who just can't stop reading. My favorite question is like, what, if you could pick one book, because you can only allow to pick one, you can do another one on another episode, but today, like, tap into the reader, to the audience that is listening today, and pick one book that had a significant change in, like, helped you, guided you, made an impact in your life that you could impart to the people who are listening.
You're gonna love this. So it's really hard for me to choose one.
I know.
But because you asked me to choose one, I chose way out of the box, and it's just for you.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings.
I do love Lord of the Rings.
I don't know what it's going to look like, but at some point I will do something, because I have analyzed this story as a metaphor for transformation, and it is just so solid.
Oh my God, I want to do a whole podcast about that now.
That's a great idea. I mean, you do have to read the book with that in mind, right? Like, look for the metaphors. But if you think about the ring, I'll just give you one. If you think about the ring as ancestral inheritance, right? Like, it comes to Frodo, it doesn't belong to him. It's very clear throughout that it doesn't belong to him. But does it weigh him down? Does it slow him down? Does it literally demand that he live a completely different life than what he would personally choose for himself? Does he have to show up in service to humanity instead of his personal preference, which would be to, like, fucking hide the ring and live in Hobbiton for the rest of his days? It's powerful on lots of levels. And for me, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned in my work in business that I'm so grateful for as a spiritual practice and in all the other areas of my life is to recognize when something doesn't belong to me. And that truly, before I started my business, I think I thought it all belonged to me. I mean, I was a little transcendent, when I'd meditate, I'd like connect with my soul, but ultimately somebody got mad at me and I would have a reaction. I thought that whole thing was about me. And really the first time that started to shift was in business. And I started to see these different reactions or behaviors or negativity, like even negative beliefs in my mind, as just another example of a ring, the ring of doom, that was passed down to me, and that because it came to me, I had to do something with it. It wasn't like I could just pretend it wasn't there, but it was okay to let it go. And in fact, that's what was wanted for myself and for the world.
Wow, so much from the Ring and the Lord of the Rings. I love this. Oh my God, Jessie, I just love you so very much. Like,
I love you too.
So much. And I know that I can't wait to, like, literally have you back to take this conversation into the next part of the puzzle, right? Amazing. Which is, we've kind of learned about your math part of you, right? Like that whole piece of the origin story, but we haven't really encapsulated the other side. And again, my hand gestures are showing this side and that side for everybody, which was that spiritual journey that you were on through the entire time that you were in the school system. However, I do want to share, if that's okay, to end off today's episode with the fact, because I know that we talked about segregation in population and, all of that, where you came up in North Carolina, to now that the true love of your life, the man that you have connected with, the man that you share all your being with, is a man of color. That's and true. It's this beautiful, full circle relationship that you come into. So I just want to celebrate that as we're ending.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm super grateful for all of that life experience, because I do think it helped me truly receive him when we met, to recognize him for who he is.
Guys, you're going to want to tune in next time, because they make music, they do there's so much conversation to be had in the next episode with Jessie Johnson. But Jessie, I'm so excited to even have begun this conversation and that we get to continue it, part 2 of the Own Your Intuitive podcast. Thank you so much for being you and being amazing. I love you.
I love you too. Have a great, great week, everybody.
All right, friends, we will tune in on Transformation Tuesday next week. You don't want to miss it. It is fine. Like, the chakra series is now over, and we're going to be dropping some deep bombs on next Tuesday's episode. Talk to you soon.